It's Colorado Matters from CPR News. I'm Ryan Warner. Police shootings have left an impression on Denver comic book creator Alan Brooks. He says he wanted to write something about the issue, but from an unexpected perspective. So he added some science fiction. And in his graphic novel series, The Burning Metronome, characters described as explorers are stuck in a strange world of unfamiliar beings called humans. There are 6 issues altogether in the series, and this first focusing on police shootings and race relations. Alan, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Why take on the issue of excessive force and race in this issue?
Well, I think, it's a very present thing on the national radar. But I feel like sci-fi and art at its highest usually resonates with something, that is real in life, like some real issues. And since this is a present issue, I felt like the best way to sort of attack it is to sort of, put it in the story and kind of explore it from a different perspective.
You are African-American. Was it cathartic to do this for you?
I think in some ways, yeah. I've obviously had some experiences with it, but I think because it's become such a national thing now to try to explore it from different perspectives. So it was important to me to not just explore it from my own perspective and sort of to treat it in the way that a journalist would. So in the writing of the story, I talk with friends of mine who are police officers to get their perspective, and then did a little research on Blue Lives Matters and, those kind of things to get all those kind of perspectives and try to work it into the story.
I want to ask you about those conversations with friends of yours who are in law enforcement in a bit, but you describe The Burning Metronome, this series, as a, quote, murder mystery graphic novel with supernatural undertones. What's the Cliff Notes version of the first issue, just to ground listeners in this story before I ask you more about creating it?
Well, basically, there's a guy who wakes up in a house, doesn't know how he got there, and we go through this kind of exploration, and as we're talking more, we learn that he's a police officer, and he has to have conversations with the girl he meets in the house about some of the decisions he's made, and that sort of leads to sort of a climactic ending,
Okay, to these conversations then with friends of yours of different perspectives, different walks of lives, how did they shape the story that you came up with?
Well, I think if you're not a police officer, like it's easy to sort of to have your critique be without a sense of the feeling of danger or fear that they might have. So in talking to people who are in those experiences or who are having to go into places where they don't know if they're going to be killed, it was important for me to understand what things they have to consider. And then with those in mind, how they feel about this sort of idea of police brutality coming a lot to the fore in media as a whole.
I also think you explore well the regret or the kind of torturous space that they have to live with after they make the decision to shoot or to not shoot.
Well, thank you, first of all.
Oh, you're welcome, sure.
Yeah, I think, you do have to make a snap decision. I don't think being a police officer is an easy job. I think because it's not an easy job, the idea that any criticism lobbied at police officers is invalid, I think that's sort of a false way to go, because just by virtue of the job, you have power over somebody's life or death. So who else should be held to a higher standard than that?
You talked about science fiction being at its best when it tackles tough issues. Can you give me examples of sci-fi on the screen, on the page, that have inspired you over the years?
Definitely.
What is it in its highest form?
Well, Twilight Zone is definitely a big influence. They were able to tackle a lot of social issues there really powerfully. I don't think it's any coincidence that the first interracial kiss on television was on Star Trek.
It broke a lot of barriers, Star Trek.
Yeah. And even on Twilight Zone, they used an all-black cast in one of their first season episodes, which at that time was almost unheard of, for an anthology series of that type. I think the beauty of sci-fi is that you can approach these issues from a different perspective. So, you can look at it as like aliens or people in the future, people in the past, and it takes out the emotional charge, which allows you to see it in just sort of a different context and maybe consider it in ways you might not have.
Right. Sci-fi deals in a way in metaphor.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you have, and this is not true of your graphic novel, but if you have tentacled beings struggling with whether or not to accept beings that have fewer tentacles, right?
Yeah.
You get to deal with the question of acceptance and tolerance and all of that in a less literal and perhaps less painful way, I think is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. This spring, you hope to release a book of all 6 issues.
That's right.
Subsequent ones focus on things like how people manipulate each other, how insecurities can manifest. Why, specifically within sci-fi, are these stories powerful as graphic novels?
I think there's a beautiful visual component with comic books specifically that you don't get in prose novels and you don't get in movies. The element is that with comic books, the reader controls the speed. So,
what do you mean by that? Explain
in a
that.
sense, like so, if you're watching a movie, the pacing is just there. Watching a television show. In a comic book, you're reading it. You determine how long you dwell on these particular aspects. The reader has to be engaged in a different way. So, like with prose, readers completely you come up with the images yourself. So there's a level of engagement, but it's more collaborative with comic books. So somebody who's reading a comic book is filling in. They're creating the motion. So there's a number of pictures in the comic book, but the reader themselves are creating the motion in between those panels. And I think there's just a different kind of involvement and engagement.
Yeah, that's interesting. The rhythm is determined by the reader. I do want to ask about the title of this series, The Burning Metronome, Alan Brooks. We are speaking with the Denver comic book creator. What does it mean, the Burning Metronome?
Well, it's sort of an abstract meaning. I like the idea of running out of time. A metronome keeps time, and if it's on fire, of course, then the time's burning up on you. And any story with a drama or anything has a ticking clock, where things are running out. You have to get it done in this amount of time, And so just the idea of the burning metronome and time's running out kind of creates an air of drama there.
You made the first issue available online last year.
Yes.
What kinds of reactions did you get to this storyline about police shootings?
It's been really positive. I think the balance that I tried to strike in telling the different perspectives in the story came through. So,
did your law enforcement friends read it?
Yeah, and they gave me positive feedback, which I wasn't sure if they would.
Well, yeah, nerve-wracking to have them read it.
Yeah, and they felt like it was fair, and entertaining. And they told me they were looking forward to other issues and upcoming issues of the book, stuff like that. So,
and the issues that they'll deal with.
Yeah,
issues in every sense of the word. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
That is Denver comic book writer Alan Brooks. He collaborated with illustrator Dion Harris and Longmont designer Matt Strackbein for the graphic novel series The Burning Metronome. All 6 issues will be out later this spring, and you can see artwork from this first issue at cprnews.org. This is Colorado Matters from CPR News.